I'm staying right here in the Fort Worth area. Dan said that I could give you a little discussion about how I got where I got as far as my trial and everything. Back in the late 90s, Aero Custom Plastics was in business, of course, building tools and doing injection molding. And I was on the cash accounting system. Well, my income or revenue from the company got to the point where I was making a certain amount of money, and the IRS came to me and said, you must now go to the accrual accounting method. And I'm assuming everybody knows what that is. So I said, okay, we can do that. So as soon as I went to the accrual accounting method, somehow I obtained a $300,000 tax bill. And it hit me like a sledgehammer. I said, how can this be? My normal tax bill for the year usually ran around $75,000 to $110,000, which I faithfully paid every year, and that was one of the things in the company. At that time, I said, whatever happens, the IRS gets paid first, and then we'll deal with the rest of the money we have left over. Well, things changed. At that point, I started studying tax law. I probably put in 5,000 to 6,000 hours over, about a 5 or 6 year period. And I come to find out that, as you all know, there's no law that requires the normal citizen of the United States to pay taxes on income that you earn within the United States. At that time, I was going to different seminars. I was looking for tax lawyers. Tax lawyers, they're not out there, not really. People like Ed Rivera, he's a good tax lawyer. He studied the taxes. He can tell you what the different class of taxes are and all that stuff. But anyways, I had a pretty good education, and I heard that a lot of employees were approaching the employer and asking them to stop withholding. Well, this sparked my interest. And lo and behold, after studying that part of it, I believe it's section 32 of Title 26 that deals with employee-employer relationships, that there is no requirement for an employer to withhold taxes. So instead of making it real hard for the employee, I've thought, well, I'm an employer, I'm going to get into this thing because I'm in the position to do it. I'm an employer by IRS standards. And I'll just stop all withholding from my employees, and therefore my employees, which they're really, just workers of mine, I'm going to use the terminology, employers, employee, wages, that's all IRS terms, you all know that. So anyways, about 3 months before the year 2000 came about, back in October of 1999, I started doing a lot of work with my employees. At the time, I had Red Beckman come out and give a seminar. Dave Champion came out and did a seminar with my employees, explaining to them what the tax law said and giving them law, their responsibility, the employer's responsibility. There wasn't any, really. The only thing that lets the employer collect taxes from his employees is the W-4, and that's it. And, if the employer does not have a signed W-4, he actually commits extortion by taking funds out of his employee's paycheck and giving it to a third party called the IRS. So he must have this W-4 in his file. The W-4s don't get sent to the IRS. They stay in the employer's file because it's the employer that needs that. Well, when I had these seminars and did all this education with the employees, I told them that I was now going to give them 30 days notice that I was canceling the W-4. And as of January 1st, 2000, I will no longer collect any taxes out of your paychecks except for state issues. Now I continue to collect the unemployment tax that goes into Texas State because we are a state here and we're not, you know, that was my decision. I didn't want to fight the state and the Fed at the same time. But at the same time, I felt that being a Texas chartered corporation at the time, I had an obligation to the state of Texas because they chartered my corporation. So I didn't want to get crossways with the state of Texas. Well, that went on. The stopping of withholding stopped January 1st. Some of my employees said, great, you know, this is wonderful. Some of them said, well, I think you're doing the wrong thing. We're going to quit. I'm sorry, but if you're not going to take taxes, I can't work for you. Okay, you know, that's their choice. It's a free country, you know, you can do it or you don't have to. But the majority of my employees said, well, you know, that sounds great. You know, we're going to still work here. We're just kind of wait and see attitude, see what happens. And we went along like that for 3 years. 2000, 2001, 2002, and then in late 2002, I received the notice from the AUSA that I was being investigated for tax issues. And this came by letter. So the letter said, we are offering you a chance to meet with us, the AUSA, and discuss this issue, and or talk to the grand jury. And of course, when I called the AUSA, David L. Jarvis, in Fort Worth, I said I'd like to do both. So the first thing was at that point we scheduled, both of us scheduled a meeting later that week on a Thursday, I believe it was. Well, Friday, late afternoon, I called David L. Jarvis and said, okay, and I'm going to be there tomorrow at our 11 o'clock meeting, or I think that's what it was. He said, well, I got something else to do. I got to cancel it. Okay. So we canceled it, and he said, let's set it up for next week. Actually, we went through the same scenario. He canceled it. Set it up one third time. And I said, you're sure you're going to be there this time? Now you got a clear calendar? He said, yeah, that's okay. So the same day, Thursday, 11 o'clock, I called him up. No, he said, I can't make it. He said, but the grand jury would like to talk to you next week then, if you want to talk to them. So I never did have this personal meeting with David L. Jarvis. But I did go down and talk to the grand jury. I don't know if most of you might know Larry Maxwell down in Houston. I don't know where he's at now, but he was down in Houston at the time. And Larry helped me put a packet of information together. We got court cases and law and treasury directives and a lot of stuff. We put together, you know, and I stayed up at this big copy machine that I had up there in the office. If some of you guys were there at meetings, you remember what it looks like. I ran all these copies and made these packets, 22 or 23 of them I made up. I went down to see the grand jury, walked in here with this big box, you know, and handed all these packets of information out. I don't think the grand juries really get that kind of information because they were very surprised, you know, to get this personal information for them to take home and read. Well, the next day, you know, I did that, and then the next week, I went down there for a question and answer session, and I guess most of them read the information. They asked me a few questions about making money, how much did you make, who are your customers, da-da-da-da-da. But they no-billed me. Okay, so that went real well. I thought, well, okay, this is great. So 3 or 4 or 5 months went by, I can't recall. I get this letter from the AUSA and says, you're being investigated by the grand jury. This is the second grand jury. And so he made the same offer, and I said, you really going to have a meeting with me this time? He says, well, probably not, but the grand jury will listen to you. Good, I want to talk to him. So I improved my packet of information. At this time, for the second grand jury, I included the videotape that Larkin Rose had made. Larkin was kind enough to send me a whole case of tapes. And so I included that. And I also included in this second packet of information rewards that were given for people that they challenged the population to prove that there was a law that required you to pay an income tax, the average person. So I included these rewards, and the total of those rewards amounted to $450,000. So when I handed the information out when I went down to talk to the grand jury, I made a point to call their attention to this rewards. And I told them, I said, you know, you people on this grand jury are really fortunate, because in your packet of information you've got these rewards that amounts to $450,000. Not only that, you've got the expert here, Mr. David L. Jarvis, who is a United States attorney, and you all know he knows the law, or he wouldn't be in the position that he's in. Why don't you ask him to show you the law that requires all of us to pay an income tax, and y'all can split the money, collect the rewards. Guess what? They found me, no-billed me. Okay? Then, about 3 or 4 months after that, I get another letter that said, you're being investigated by the grand jury. This is the third time. I said, wait a minute, you know, I called David L. Jarvis up, and I said, you know, how can you keep doing this? Are you going to, you know, I've been in front of 2 grand juries now, and they both no-billed me. How can you keep calling me in front of a grand jury? I mean, when is this going to stop? He says, don't worry, it'll stop. Well, when can I come down and talk to him? He says, well, I don't think the foreman, he said, I had a talk with the foreman, and he said, I don't think that the grand jury wants to talk to you. And I said, wait a minute, you know, how can you do this now? You said I could talk to the first grand jury, I could talk to the second grand jury. Why can't I talk to the third one? I said, why don't you go talk to the foreman and tell him I want to come down and talk to him? He said, okay, I'll do that. So I didn't hear from him. I knew when they were meeting. So I went down there 7 o'clock in the morning. They convened at 7:30. So I'm sitting in the basement of the courthouse down there. When they all started filing in, I didn't know which one was the foreman at that time. So after they went in, then maybe 20 minutes after most of them were in the room already, David L. Jarvis comes strutting down, and I stopped him in the hallway. I said, look, I'm here, and I want you to go talk to the foreman and tell him I'd like to have a word with him. Would you do that? He says, okay, I'll do that. So he went right in the room, you know, and I'm sitting out there waiting. About 15 minutes, he comes back and says, well, the foreman said he doesn't really want to talk to you. He doesn't think that you'll have anything of interest to say to him, but he'll come out and listen to what you have to say. I said, great, all right, that's good. So About 3 hours later, just before they were ready to go to lunch break, the foreman comes out, along with Jarvis, of course, and they're standing there, and I looked at the foreman, and I introduced myself and told him who I was, and I said, you know, I'd really like to address the grand jury because I really believe that I have exculpatory evidence to show them about my position about what I'm being investigated for. Excuse me. And the grand jury foreman kind of rocked back and forth, and he looked at Jarvis and he looked at me and said, well, Mr. Simkanin, I don't really think that anything you have to say to us will change our mind. And I looked at him and I go, change your mind? Did you already make a decision? He says, well, no. He said, we haven't voted yet, but I don't think that anything that you say will make a difference in the case then. He said, let me put it that way. So at that point, yeah, I couldn't force myself. So they went to lunch. You know, I did the best I could to try to talk to this grand jury, and I left. That was on a Wednesday. The very next day, which was June the 17th, I was arrested in front of my business, Aero Custom Plastics, and probably about a 18 to 20 car with cars come up as I drove up to the front of my business. You know, they all surrounded me, and they didn't have guns drawn, but they were wearing guns. And I got out of the car, they put handcuffs on me and took everything out of my pockets, and that was it. They took me down to Fort Worth holding cell, and the rest is kind of history. Until the first trial. Actually, I should tell you that there was one incident that is really not known, and that is they offered me a plea agreement. I thought about it for a couple of days. I had conversations with my wife at the time, and she really talked me into taking the plea agreement. And the plea agreement was, look, you're facing probably 27 years of prison time, and we're going to offer you 3 years, and we will dismiss all of the counts except one. So that was what they were offering. Now, I had 31 counts against me. So after the conversation I had with my wife, I decided to go ahead and take the plea. So I signed the plea for 3 years. I'd go into prison for 3 years. About 4 or 5 days after I signed the plea, Arch McCall came to the prison which I was being held over in Fort Worth, and he said, the government's withdrawing the plea. I said, what? They said, yeah, the government's withdrawing the plea. How can they do that? I said, I signed it, the deal's made. They said, well, they found out that they could not offer you 3 years because it was not the minimum for what I was being charged with. He said, however, they're willing to make you the exact same offer, but instead of 3 years, it's going to be 5 years. Well, Tom and I had a little discussion about that. He came to see me, and between the two of us, we kind of felt that we've got a little divine intervention here. And I think I was just being told not to do it. to go with a trial and just do it. So that's what I did. Anyways, "7 years is a long time to spend in prison, but I made it." A couple other issues. I should have been out 18 months ago. The DNA issue come up. Now, Congress back in 2000 wrote a law, which is the DNA Analysis Backlog Elimination Act of 2000. And in 2004, every convicted felon, and now I believe it's every conviction period, or even if you are picked up by any police station in any part of the country, local, state, or federal, you have to give them a DNA sample. Okay, I did that. I gave them a DNA sample in January of 2009. However, I did a little research on that law, and the law says that they can, by force, take a sample of your DNA, which they prefer to do it in blood. Okay, that's fine. So they took my blood, but I wouldn't give them the fingerprints. The FBI has this little packet. It's a DNA collection kit. Nowhere in the law does it say fingerprints are required. Not in the statutes, not in the regulations, not in the BOP policy. Nowhere does it mention fingerprints. But it does say on the DNA collection kit from the FBI, fingerprints are required by the FBI. Well, I refused to give them fingerprints. We went round and round about it for about a half a day. I went and talked to case managers, consulars, lieutenants, captains. They kept calling me, and they were shuffling me back and forth between the medical facility and their offices. And I finally told them, I said, I'm not refusing to give you guys fingerprints. I want you to know that. But what I am doing is doing this conditionally. I will give you the fingerprints under condition that you show me my obligation in law or otherwise, other than the FBI's requirement, which the FBI doesn't write the law, and I'll do it. Well, needless to say, nobody could come up with the law. So this was, like I said, January 2009. I was due to go get released to halfway house on June the 2nd. 10 days before that date came, they asked me again if I was going to give my fingerprints. And I said, well, look, my position hadn't changed. As soon as you show me in law my requirements, I'll do it. I said, I'm a law-abiding guy. I assume you guys are. But they kind of laughed, But anyways, so they said, well, since you're not going to do that, we're going to cancel your halfway house. I said, okay. Really didn't want to go there anyway. Then they started writing me shots. A shot is something that you violate or do some infraction, you disobey one of their rules. Well, they said that I was impeding the duty of an officer of the BOP by not submitting to this fingerprints. And I got 18 shots over a period of about a year. Each one of these shots that they gave me, you went before what's called you had a UDC hearing, Unit Disciplinary Committee. And the first time I went to that, they took 2 weeks of phone privileges away from me. That was in January. That was the very first one. Then all of the successive shots that I got, the UDC said, well, we can't do anything more harsh than that, so we're going to shove this on up to what's called a DHO hearing. And this is a disciplinary hearing officer done out of Dallas by video teleconferencing. They escort you into this little room, and then they've got a video set up, and you're actually looking at this officer who's sitting in Dallas. And they're going to be the judge now on giving you some kind of penalty for the infraction that you've done. So this gal's name, who was my judge, or the hearing officer's name was Rosillas. And she was kind of a funny lady, but she dealt out some harsh stuff, not only to me, but to everybody else that was in front of her, that I've learned from time to time. Anyways, the successive shots that I got, she would take good time away from me that I had earned, 30 days, 60 days. And of course, I was immediately put in disciplinary segregation, which is the hole. Not quite solitary confinement, but close to it. Yeah, thank you. So I'm in the hole. I went to the hole on June 29th of last year. And it's kind of funny, the shots that I would get in the hole, one of BOP's medical personnel, guys by the name of Jenkins, G. Jenkins, who was the contagious disease coordinator. He's the guy that gave you the little TB shots, you know, and checked you for having TB. Other than that, I haven't seen him do really a whole lot. And he would come down to my little 6x9 room that I shared with another guy. And he would walk up, and there's this little window. It's maybe about that big, about 8x8. And he'd knock on the window. He'd say, "Mr. Simkanin, are you ready to give your fingerprints?" I said, "Well, Mr. Jenkins, as soon as you show me the law that requires me to do so, you can be the hero. I'll give you my fingerprints." He said, "Okay." And he'd leave. I'd get another shot. So anyways, that's how that went. Life in the hole is not really too exciting. We have a book cart that comes around, and you know, we can read books and novels and whatever. We're pretty much locked down 24/7. We get to go outside 1 hour a day for 5 days, Monday through Friday. And we're allowed to take a shower 3 times a week, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. We weren't allowed to go to the chow hall. Food was brought to us every day. And they would put it through a little, what we called a bean hole in the door. It had a little door they opened up and shove your trays of food through it. You know, I will admit that the food wasn't really all that bad. What I ate today was a much more rich food than what I've had for a long time. But I made it through in good shape. The good Lord protected me, provided for my needs, gave me peace. I made it. So here I am. So if anybody's got any questions, I'll try to answer them, you know, to do the best I can.
Made it unbroken and unbound. Come to the microphone if you would. Dick, would you do, if you think back before your imprisonment, is there anything that you would do differently? You had suggested to me at one point that you'd probably not go the corporation route. You want to speak on that?
Well, of course, knowing what I know, today, I mean, hindsight, you can't really say for sure exactly what you would have done different because, back then, you don't have the knowledge that you've got now. But if I had the knowledge I had today, back then, yeah, I would have done things differently. I wouldn't really have gone up and, punched the beast in the nose and put a great big target on my back. That was foolish, and I did a foolish thing. However, I'm a person of principle, and I will do what I say I'm going to do, and I've done that. I would probably do things more from a documented standpoint. I would do things from an administrative approach and be very careful to document everything that I did, thinking that it would lead to what happened. That I'm going towards a trial and I'm preparing myself for that. Now, I'll stand here and say, I didn't really do that. I mean, I had beliefs, I had conversations with many, many, many people, including a lot of you people, and that's where my beliefs came from. And I did what I did. But to answer your question, it would be different from the standpoint of really preparing myself to have a trial. That's what I would do different.
Dick, I'm just curious as to why you refused to give the fingerprints, even if a law didn't demand it, because you knew you were going to have to give them when you got out anyway. I mean, they're not going to release you without positively identifying you.
All right, you're not the first person to ask that question. Many of the people that I was in the hole with, of course, and a little bit before that, asked the exact same question. Why don't you give them the damn prints and get the hell out of here? All right. Why do they, when I'm looking at the law and I'm looking at, gee, there's nothing there about fingerprints, but these guys want fingerprints. What's the big deal? The big deal is, Scripture says, life is in the blood. Okay? The law says you got to give them your blood. Why? Well, they want to take your blood, they want to do the DNA analysis on it, and then they want to catalog that analysis in what's called the codex system by the FBI. The FBI runs this codex system, and everybody's DNA goes into it. What they do with that is they compare it against all crimes done in the past that are unsolved that have DNA connected to it. Well, at the time, I think I read somewhere that DNA was about 82% accurate. Now, I think over the past 7 years, or maybe a little more, they may have gotten a little more accurate than that. However, there is some percentage of error. One of the reasons I didn't want to give them my fingerprints was because I didn't want them to put my DNA in the codex system and have that error come up and maybe be charged with some crime that I didn't do. Now, a lot of people thought in prison that I was hiding something. That's why I wasn't giving them my DNA. And I said, listen to me, I gave them my DNA. They took my blood. I don't have nothing to hide. So, anyways, the one reason that I didn't want my DNA in that codex system, all right, and life is in the blood. You remember I said something about authorization in the law. Where's the authorization? And I said that these fingerprints were the authorization. Now, if you give them the blood and you give them the authorization to take the blood, and at the same time as you've given them authorization, you're waiving your right to all interest in your property that you have given them, or they have taken, which is what the case is they've taken that property that you have, and now by your fingerprints, you waive all that interest that you had in that blood. So that's what I didn't want to do, is waive my interest and give them authorization to take my property. Now, in my research, when I was doing reading the law books on this, there was a court case, Kincaid, U.S. versus Kincaid, where the Supreme Courts had already gone through the Fourth Amendment, the Fifth Amendment, you know, the privacy rights and all that stuff, and they said, well, this doesn't apply. However, at the end of the Kincaid case, one of the dissenting judges said that we have not addressed this issue from a property standpoint. Now, there's my door. So I'm not claiming Fourth Amendment violation. I'm not claiming Fifth Amendment violation. I'm claiming theft. That's what I'm claiming. They need my authorization to take my bodily fluid. They do the same thing when they drug test you from time to time in one of these facilities that's run by the feds. They do a piss test. And when they do that, you pee in a little cup and they test it for drugs. However, they have you sign a document, initial here and initial here. Why do they do that? Because they need your authorization to take your bodily fluids. Give them all the piss they want. Just don't sign the document. They can't use it. Even if it's dirty, they can't use it because they fail to get your permission to take your property. So, one of the little things I learned in prison, they can't take something from you without you telling them they can have it. You know, in prison, they want your signature a lot. And they want it for two reasons. One, they want your permission to hurt you. Two, they want your signature because you're waiving a right. That's the only reason they want your signature. They either want to hurt you or they want you to waive a right. 4 years ago, I stopped signing everything when I found that out. I tried to get an address where I was going to be staying when I was released from prison. My case manager, I said, well, you know, I don't know where I'm going to be. I said, you know, isn't that what halfway house is for? You got to give me a halfway house so I can find a place to live, find a job, get a car, da-da-da. Oh, but we need to know where you're going to be staying. Well, I don't know. So, a couple of days I get called down to see my so-called case manager. He says, well, he says, I've got your probation officer on the phone. He wants to talk to you. I says, well, I don't have a case manager, or I told the case manager, I said, I don't have a probation officer. He says, well, you're a future probation officer. I said, oh, okay. So he gave me the phone, and I said, hello. And he said, Mr. Simkanin, this is David Scott. I'm going to be your probation officer when you get to Fort Worth, when you're released from prison. I said, okay. He says, I need to know what your address is going to be so we can check things out. I said, I'll tell you what, Mr. Scott, as soon as I locate the bridge I'll be living under, I'll let you know. He says, let me talk to your case manager. Case manager took the phone. He said, see, I told you. He ain't saying nothing. He said, and he waving me out the door. Get out of my office. See you later. So that's how that went. But I haven't signed anything or given them any information. And they really, they didn't come after me or abuse me for doing anything in that respect.
Did you meet any of the local DFW people while you were in prison that we may haven't heard from for a few years?
The only person that I met over in Texarkana that some of you might have known is Larry Kennemore. And Larry's doing good. I mean, he's definitely in his realm over there in the law library. 2 years ago, the law library converted to computer system, and I think they put in something like 24, 26 stations inside the law library, so nobody's using the books anymore, or very little. They're all using the computer system. But, I didn't have a whole lot to do with Larry before he went to prison. But he is a kind of an interesting character, and, he's very demanding, and he is the local law guru, at least for now, over in Texarkana. A lot of people go to him and ask him about different questions, and, everybody needs a little scam to make a little money, and Larry makes a few bucks to helping other people out. And in his part, I wouldn't call it a scam or anything, because he does put his heart into trying to literally help people over there. And I could stand here and tell you all kinds of stories about people that are in prison that don't belong there. They just don't belong there. Just one. Let me give you one. A guy down in Houston, older guy, about my age, maybe a little older. He had some warehouses, and he had 4 warehouses, and that's all he did was warehouse. A friend of his asked him if he could store a couple pallets of materials in his warehouse. He said, sure, no problem. He said, I won't even charge you for it. So the guy brought in a couple pallets. Next thing you know, the feds are banging on the door. They broke the door down, broke into the place. They found some drugs on the pallets. And since this poor guy owned the warehouses, they gave him 22 years on a drug charge. This is typical of what's actually going on down there. There was another case where a guy was there in prison. He said his son wanted to borrow 10 grand from him. He says, I would loan my son money from time to time. He said, $15,000, $5,000, $10,000. He's always paid me back. This is no big deal. However, this time, the son bought some dope, and it was learned later that he got the money from his dad. His dad didn't have a clue what he was wanting the money for. Didn't ask him, trusted his son. And he got 18 years. because he financed a drug purchase. Didn't have nothing to do with it. I run across these stories every day. Every day. 90% of the people in prison, at least in the low security like Texarkana was, just low security, they don't belong there. They didn't commit a crime. They did not commit a crime. Literally did not even come close to committing a crime. You know, I just find it amazing.
I read some of Alexander Solzhenitsyn's works. I'm vertically disadvantaged. His Gulag work and all of the thing, and he said when he got through with his stay in the Soviet system's prison, he was unable to raise a level of respect for anyone in the system. He didn't care whether it was a bailiff of the court or a guard or a parole officer. He said, you can't be a part of the system and have any self-respect. Even though you might be uninformed, you're a part of a terrible system of tyranny. And I wondered, do you share Solzhenitsyn's lack of respect for people in a criminally tyrannical system?
All right, thanks. That's a good question. Spending 7 years in prison and talking to a lot of people that, of course, were there with me, you look at the class of people that are there, and you look at the class of people that are controlling those people, which are the guards. And you learn very quickly that the guards, how can I say this? They seem to be one of two classes. One is a very minimum IQ level. The second one is that they're sadistic, and they very much love to control people, and they like to hurt people. You know, and I feel bad saying that, but they do. You know, I've watched these guys come in and mill around and talk to each other before they actually come into the facility. And when they cross that line and they meet their first inmates, their whole character changes. And they literally become sadistic. They become very bossy. They want to control everything. And there's no need for that. Now, talking to the inmates there, remember this is a low security facility, and some of these men have come from ADX facilities, which is supermax, and medium security facilities. As time goes by, some of these people that are charged with certain crimes, they go into a higher security, and then as time goes by, they can progress to a lower security, and sometimes they can even go from a supermax, which is maximum security, all the way down to a camp, which has no fences at all. Okay, so they can progress to do that, but these people say that in the maximum security places, there's a high respect for each other, and the each other is the inmates and the guards. They respect each other. But as you get lower in the security, you get a different attitude of these people that are guards, and they're really in a world by themselves. It's hard for me to describe it, but you don't want to be around them, you know. And especially the women guards. No offense to women in general, but wow, you know, and they have women guards over there too. Some of these women guards, they'll administer showers. And in this, now I'm talking in the segregation unit. This is not true out in the general population where you're living in a housing unit. Actually, living in the housing unit it's not that bad. I mean, really, it isn't. But when you're in the seg unit, you're in your cell, and when you go to take a shower, you stick your hands out, actually behind you, and they reach their hands in the bean hole and they handcuff you. And of course, then they lead you down the hall, and then you go into where the showers are. And a lot of times the women will hang right there by the door, and they'll want to watch and look at you, and and this is stupid. I mean, these are grown women, and they're in there to guards. But I also must say at the same time, there are men that do that too, and they'll stand there and watch you, and what are they getting out of this? What's the matter with these people? Not all of them, but this is what you got going on over there, and it's crazy. But they do it. So yeah, they're a different type of people.
Well, being this is the first opportunity, just to set the record straight, I was not aware that they had 3 shots. I knew about 2 of them, but there was 3 shots on the grand jury. Is that correct?
That's right.
Okay, and then there were 2 trials before they actually got it.
That's right.
Now, the question I have for you has to do with the word remorseful. But most of the people here and those that might watch this video are not aware of the circumstances that led up to the acquittal of the hung jury on the first trial, where the juror stated that you failed to display enough remorse during the trial. And, for the record, after in good faith you went to the grand jury on 2 separate occasions and they billed you, the thing should have been dead in the water right there from their side, if in fact they were operating in good faith.
Well, that's probably true, but I don't think that the first jury or the second jury knew that there were 3 grand juries.
Right. And that's just the point that, not just your so-called alleged counsel should have made that an issue right at the very start and alleged that, in fact, that Mr. Jarvis' character was not only not acting in good faith, he in fact represented bad faith de facto because these circumstances had arisen prior to that situation there in Judge McBride's courtroom.
Yeah, and I agree with you 100%. And you bring up a good point about the AUSA David L. Jarvis. A United States attorney's job, number 1 job that the law says he's supposed to do is protect the rights of the defendant. That's what he's supposed to do. But they don't do that.
No, and of course that begs the question as to who they actually work for.
Well, yeah, obviously, and of course, and is there an action going in the Supreme Court or someplace right now talking about jurors being paid by the state? Anybody hear anything about that? The jurors actually being paid by the state, and they are. They're allowed a daily allowance. I don't remember what it was, but to be a juror, they get paid by the state. So yeah, so aren't you working for the state?
For really, talk about 2-bit whores.
Yeah, I mean everybody's getting paid by the state.
Well, so there were several Branch Davidians that were just recently released as well, and they have gone through just hell, literally, And for that to happen, not just your case, but the Davidians as well in Texas, the light is shining on us to act, to come to our senses and realize that we're not dealing with people who act in good faith. I was also wanting to ask you, are you familiar with Aaron Russo's film, America from Freedom to Fascism?
Yes, I'm familiar with it, but I have not seen it, of course.
That's what I was
and that's one of the films that I definitely want to see.
So you have a lot of... You know, I got to visit with Joe Bannister back in 2000 in Denver, he and D.V. Kidd, and I don't know, I know he was at your trial, I believe.
Yeah, Joe Bannister was there.
And
Yeah.
of course, when you get to see America from Freedom to Fascism, I think you'll really enjoy that. I would encourage everybody to think up a good question for Mr. Simkanin, because he represents a lot for us, and he's endured a lot as well. Thank you.
All right. Well, before the next question, let me just take the opportunity right here to really thank you all for coming out here. You know, I really do appreciate it very much that that you've done this for me, and God bless you all.
Well, I know that many of the people who are here are interested in legal matters and legal research and so forth, and maybe for those who watch this tape, I was court watching at the trial, and I was shocked by the amount of information that was not allowed into evidence. I was shocked by the way the witnesses were treated, and I just kind of wanted your reflections on that. You know, is it the motion in limine that the state did that, I mean, that was, the entire trial to me was a denial of justice. If you could comment to that.
All right. Of course, the second trial was predicated on the first trial. The first trial, I was allowed to submit about 75% of my evidence to the jury for deliberation, and I was allowed to use, I believe at the time it was 4 witnesses, expert witnesses. When the second trial started, Judge John Henry McBride said, "We made some mistakes at the first trial." And he's saying this in open court, while the jury's sitting. He said, "We made some mistakes and we're not going to repeat those mistakes." And he said, "I'm going to summarily deny 100% of your evidence, Mr. Simkanin. And I'm going to allow you 2 expert witnesses." At that point, I'm thinking to myself, what do I got here? What do I have here? Mr. McCall, what do we do now? We'll do all right. And, you know, during the first trial, Arch McCall, he did a good job. He really didn't know that much about taxes and tax law. And Tom Selgus and Brian Malatesta and Tony, what's Tony's last name? Severino. Severino? Severese, okay, Tony Severese. Those guys worked their tails off to educate Arch McCall. And they did a pretty good job, and it showed in the first trial. But the second trial, something happened. We can all speculate on what happened, and I don't want to accuse anybody of anything, but something happened. And the man really didn't perform like he did in the first trial. Actually, I don't really, knowing what I know now, I wouldn't even have any attorney for that kind of a trial. You know, attorneys aren't all that bad, but if they don't do what the judge tells them to do, they lose their bar card. You know, whether the dues are paid up or not, the judge don't care. He can take that bar card away from them anytime he wants to. You know, and these attorneys, some of them go 6, 8 years to school. Well, they don't want to lose their ability to earn their second vacation home. you know, and their Mercedes that they drive around and all that stuff. You know, I don't fault them for that, but they do what the judge wants them to do.
I don't remember what it was that the prosecution brought up, but Arch McCall very quickly said, we stipulate to that. And I'm questioning in my mind, why would you stipulate to anything in this trial? The whole point is that the state needs to make their case. And I found that very strange, and as I say, I don't remember the point, but I was watching you, and you kind of looked a little confused at that point, and I'm like, something happened here, and I'm not sure what happened, but it didn't look good.
I remember that that comment coming up by Mr. McCall, and I'm sorry, but I don't remember the stipulation that we concurred to at the time. But you know, I think it was something that was very obvious that, you know, we really didn't need to argue. But I do agree with you that, you know, it's definitely up to prosecution to prove the case. And you might all agree with me that there was nothing proven there. In that second trial, the only thing that was proven beyond a shadow of a doubt was that Dick Simkanin made money. And that was it. What else did they prove? I mean, they had my comptroller up there on the stand. It's, you know, he made this much money. They had my banker up there, and he just potted this much money. But they never said anything about breaking a law. So they didn't prove anything other than the fact that the guy made money. Now, you know, and it's beyond me how a jury can convict a person that does the same thing they do. You know, we all make money. We got to live. So, I mean, I'm just as confused as you are.
Well, I want to make a couple of remarks, then I'm going to ask you a question, Dick. I've served 2 prison sentences for contempt.
God bless you.
And I was put in prison for preventive detention. It wasn't anything that I had done. It was what they thought I might do in interfering with the sale of my property. And I've had the CID come out brandishing their weapons within 2 feet of my head just to serve me papers to show up in court. And then I've had the federal marshals in their flak gear show up. And so, listen, we're living in a fascist government, whether you know it or not. 2 things. One of the things, since Dick brought up the Lord in the Bible, the only profession that the God-man Jesus Christ condemned was lawyers and sorcerers. And lawyers are sorcerers. They conjure up things. I was just reading an article that I had kept where they stage automobiles, accidents, and sicknesses, and all of that kind of stuff. And of course, as you know, we have more people incarcerated in prison than China does. And as Dick said, I was in Fort Worth, and you know, I didn't like being counted 12 to 15 times a day and not treated like a person, not treated like a human being. And these people are sadistic. But again, God showed me favor, and when I first checked in, I did have a black Christian guard who looked at my papers, and he saw that I was placed with a Navajo Indian who had committed murder, who showed me all the ropes on what to do and how to please everyone and get away with it. Now, there was a one man, though, that had a confession against you that he had heard you threaten to kill the judge or something like that. And of course, I was with you on the day when supposedly you made that statement, and they wouldn't allow me to testify on your behalf. But whatever happened to that son of Belial?
You're talking about the ex-IRS agent out of California that said that I made the comment that 2 federal judges should be knocked off in order to advance the tax honesty movement.
Yeah.
Now, that statement by itself is ridiculous. How can killing 2 federal judges advance anything? Okay? I mean, let's get real. And how can a judge, you know, believe such stupidity? Especially when the guy that's supposed to have made the statement was on an airplane between Dallas and California. At the time that he said it, he was on an airplane. Tom Selgus and Brian, I believe, were instrumental in collecting affidavits from everybody that was at that meeting, and every one of them in an affidavit said, Simkanin didn't say anything about that, nor did anybody else even mention the name of a judge or judge period, let alone threaten to kill him. And so judge wouldn't have any part of it. Here again, what they wanted to do was put me behind bars and destroy Aeroplastics, which they did. So that was their goal, and they did it. By any means, by whatever it took, that's what they were going to do, and they did it.
Well, the other thing, but Dick is right. On the walls of the Justice Department, it says they've done their duty when a citizen's rights are protected. And they're doing the opposite. And the reason they get, I've heard, they get performance bonuses and cash awards if they get convictions. Have you heard that?
I can prove that. It's a law.
Who said that?
I can. I said it. I can prove they get a bonus.
Okay. Good. I'd like to get your.
I got it in writing from the judge.
Okay. I'll give you my name and address, and I want you to.
You got that into evidence in the first trial, didn't you?
Okay. But anyway, I'm so glad you're back.
All right.
And God controls our circumstances. Nothing happens to us unless they get permission. And so what are you going to do in the future, though, to get things turned around?
Well, Mel, I haven't really made up my mind exactly what I'm going to do. I have plenty of options, and I appreciate your comments that you made. I'll correct one thing that you said, and you said that the United States has more people in prison than China. Actually, the United States has more people in prison than the whole rest of the world. Yeah. Yeah.
And they're for-profit prisons.
Yeah.